This rather tall structure behind me is ICI House. It's the headquarters of Imperial Chemical Industries here in Melbourne. It's a rather spectacular building, although perhaps not as spectacular when you compare it with other tall buildings in Melbourne in 1974. The ICI building was completed in around about 1959 and then was Australia's tallest skyscraper, a skyscraper being a sort of a nickname given to very tall buildings. And as I mentioned, there are now lots of buildings a lot taller than ICI House. ICI make chemicals, they make paints, they make synthetic fibres, nylon and terylene, and all sorts of things. This is their head office, and there are some rather interesting facts about the building. For example, it contains 300,000 square feet of space, which is sufficient to accommodate 1,500 office employees. And there's all sorts of things went into the building itself. 2,600 tonnes of structural steel, 153 miles of electrical cable, 3 acres of external glass, 15 tonnes of putty, that's a lot of putty, and 250,000 floor tiles. Well, that's something about the building. What I was wondering was, what happens if you work right on the very top floor? This building is 22 floors in all, and 22 floors, would you believe, so see quickly searching through his notes, takes up, would you believe, I'll have to sort of search through my notes to find out exactly how tall the building is. We'll find that out though. But what happens if you're working at the top floor? Do you walk up the stairs? I tell you what, if you had to walk up 22 flights of stairs, you wouldn't even feel like working. Fortunately, Johns and Waygood, Perry Engineering, have come to the rescue, and I'd like you to meet 2 people from that organisation who have installed elevators in the building to transport the people from the bottom to the top. And first of all, I'd like you to meet Mr. Don Fleming, who is the sales manager. Welcome, Mr. Fleming, of Johns and Waygood. And also Mr. Harvey Lewis, who is the field operations manager. Come in closer. First of all, can I ask you, if you'd like to come in a bit closer too, Mr. Fleming, when were elevators first thought of?
The elevator is a very old machine. They were used in the time of Archimedes, invented the first unit. He operated it with a rope and slaves, on which slaves pulled on one end, and a chair, a basket chair on the other, and he rose to the upper floors of his palace by these means.
Of course, that's not how it works now, though, is it?
No.
It all works on electricity.
No, it's computer control now and electricity. And in this building we have 8 lifts running right through the building, and the waiting interval, the lifts are designed to provide a waiting interval for the average person of about 30 seconds, so that's all you have to wait for a lift, and it's designed to fill the building in about 30 minutes. Fill or empty it.
It's well worth waiting 30 seconds when it might take you 7 days to walk up the stairs.
Oh my word.
I think. It's interesting to note too, I think, that elevators sort of haven't always been computerised. In fact, at one stage of the game, and there are still operating in Melbourne some lifts that are worked on a water principle, a pump principle.
One of the earliest type lifts was a bucket again on one end of a rope and a basket or a cage on the other. And to raise the bucket with people in it, raise the cage with people in it, the bucket was filled with water until it overcame the weight of the passengers. And so the passengers went up as the bucket of water went down, and then when the car was required to go up again, they would empty the bucket just sufficient to allow it to travel upwards and let the opposite occur.
Now that's a rather slow way of getting up and going down again. So let me now ask Mr. Lewis a question. How fast do they go now? Of course, they're getting faster and faster, like practically everything, aren't they?
Yes, well in Australia, of course, we're a little behind the United States, but not very far behind. We've got lifts running here in Melbourne at 1,000 feet a minute, and it won't be too long before we're into the 1,200 feet per minute area. This is not far behind the world standards. I think in the New York at the moment, we're travelling at probably 1,600 or 1,800 feet per minute. So, as you can see, Australia's not too far behind the world leaders.
Yes, indeed. Now, we're going to have a look at the lifts in the Manchester Unity building in just a moment. The lifts in that building are, in fact, the oldest fast lifts, aren't they? They were the first fast lifts that were installed in Melbourne.
Yes, they were one of the faster type of lifts pre-war. They are...
By today's standards, they're quite slow, aren't they?
By today's standards, you would say that they are not slow, they're in the medium speed range.
It's almost sort of thinking of 1,200 feet a minute. It would be sort of quicker to go down in the lift than jump out the window.
I wouldn't like to try it.
Well, no, of course. Well, I mean, you wouldn't want to if you wanted to get down really fast.
The lift stops rather more gently.
Yes. There is one question I want to ask. Every now and again, we hear of lifts sort of stopping halfway between floors. Why? What happens to the computer then?
The stoppage is occurred by some fault that occurs on the lift, but it's quite safe. There's no danger whatsoever.
Well, now, how do you get out? Sort of, what happens?
Most lifts have an intercommunication system or a telephone in the car, and the safest thing to do is to use the telephone and call for service and sit patiently until the serviceman comes.
Don't panic.
Don't panic and don't try and get out.
And don't try and get out, no.
Wait till the serviceman lets you out.
How many major companies are there installing lifts in buildings in Australia? Johns and Waygood, Perry,
There are
of
three
course,
major
the
companies.
major one, aren't they?
We do most of the work in the country, yes.
Are they the best?
My word.
Of course they are, yes. There are three other companies. There are two other companies. Aha. Well, this is rather interesting. Now, the Manchester Unity building, as we said, it has the first of the fast lifts in it, which by today's standards, as we've also mentioned, are relatively slow. We're going to look at those lifts and we're going to talk about driving a lift with someone who spends her time driving a lift, which seems like an unusual sort of a profession to take on, but presumably a profession it is.
Yes, lift drivers, there are still quite a few in Melbourne. Mostly they're in department stores and hospitals.
Of course, now you drive it yourself, don't you? You get in and press the button and away you go by yourself.
You do, but with a lot of the older lifts, it's a profession, there's a large amount of skill required. And of course, you've not only got to be skillful in operating the lift, but you've got to be skillful in some of these jobs with handling the people that ride in them.
There's another thing that I'd like to ask just briefly. You get into a lift and you find a little notice which says no more than 15 persons. Why shouldn't any more people get in? Is it going to be too much strain on the works or what?
Well, I think when you're designing any piece of equipment, whether it be a rowboat, a motor car or a lift, you've got to design for a certain capacity. And I think it's rather obvious that you wouldn't try and put 15 people into a mini miner where you'd put them into a bus, wouldn't you? So you've got to design your lift accordingly. But normally this is taken care of by design standards which are set, and cars under the law here in Victoria are not allowed to be made physically bigger than the load that they could accept. So virtually they could not be overloaded.
That explains it. Right. We're going to pop off to the Manchester Unity building and have a look at the lifts in that building, which are somewhat older than these ones. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for talking to us, and we wish Johns and Waygood continued success if they bung up any taller buildings than this one. Do you have lifts in Australia Square in Sydney, which is Australia's tallest building?
No, we don't.
Oh, there was an embarrassing question. Good heavens.
Well, it's not embarrassing. You can't have lifts in every building.
No, I guess you can't.
And we're lucky that we've got them in most.
Very good. The Manchester Unity building, a very oldie-worldy sort of a building. This one, it's rather oldie-worldy lifts too.
Yes, they've been in here since 1932.
Sort of now we've sort of gone all modernistic and functional. There's no more sort of nice modern designs or anything on the doors now, are there?
Well, I think that costs play a big part in this, because today, for this sort of work, you'd have to pay so much extra money for it.
Aha. So maybe these are more expensive lifts. And here it is. Let's go for a bit of a ride, shall we? Well, here we are in the Manchester Unity. Let's go up, shall we? We're in the rather impressive Manchester Unity building lift, and our driver is
Shirley Dike.
Shirley. How long have you been driving the lift?
7 years.
So that's a long time to be going up and down in the Johns and Waygood lift.
Yes, it's quite a long time.
What do you think about when you're going up and down?
Well, I enjoyed taking people up, I think. And,
You would meet a lot of people, wouldn't
oh,
you?
my word, yes, quite a lot.
It's sort of rather funny when you stop all of a sudden, isn't it? You must get used to that
You
sensation.
get used to all the sensations.
And the door opens all by itself, and the
That's
people
right.
presumably swarm in. No more than how many people? 15 or something, I suppose?
Or around about 20.
Have you ever been stuck in the lift?
Oh, yes.
How many
quite
times?
often.
Bearing in mind that we've got two
Well,
people from Johns and Waygood with us.
Well, I'd say about half a dozen.
In 7 years, that's
In
not
7
bad
years,
going.
that's not too bad.
That's a pretty good recommendation. Let's go down again, shall we? And as we're going down, I found out some fascinating information for you. ICI House is 275 feet in height, so that's a pretty tall building. So in anybody's language, I think you'll agree.
Oh, word.
It's been very nice talking to you. Thank you so much for going to so much trouble for us. We hope that you will have fun in another 7 years driving up
I
and down.
hope so too.
Yes.
I enjoy it.
Great.